Oh, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 2025 Collaborative Futures mini conference hosted by the Ontario Council of University Libraries. Before we get started, I just want to take you through some housekeeping. So firstly, my name is Annika Irvenwald. I'm Assistant Director of Collaborative Initiatives here at OCUL. And as we're moving through today, we just want to share some details to get you set up. So firstly, here is the schedule. You can find the schedule on the OCUL website, and we'll be adding a link to that in the chat. So you can have a look at that at any time. You can also have a look and download the presenter slides as well. So as you see here, we will shortly be having welcome remarks, and then our presentations are in 2 blocks with a break at 10:30 in the middle. And then we will have some time for questions at the end of the morning. So as you will have heard, this event is being recorded and will be made available on the OCUL YouTube channel in the coming days. We will also update the OCUL website, that event page that we linked to before, and circulate the details to anyone who has registered. Automated closed captions are available by clicking on the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen. If you're having trouble finding that, just send us a message and we can direct you. We ask that you actually keep your cameras and your mics off during the presentations. However, if you're a presenter, please turn your camera on and when it's your time to present so we can quickly find you. We'll have questions at the end of each of the presentations as directed by the moderators of each of the sessions. And we will also have time at the end, as I mentioned, for any other follow-up questions if we run out of time during after each of the presentations. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat throughout the morning. We will be monitoring that, keeping an eye and making sure that those questions come through to the presenters. Or you can raise your hand using the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen and unmute during question time. Okay, so I would now like to welcome Nicole Nolan, the University Librarian at Brock University and Chair of the Collaborative Futures Steering Committee, to start us off for the morning.
Thank you, Annika. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Welcome everybody. I am very privileged to be opening the fourth annual OCUL CF mini conference. We're coming together virtually from territories across Ontario, so please do reflect on the traditional territory on which you are located. I right now am on campus at Brock University, so I'll give Brock's land acknowledgement. Brock University acknowledges the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is with the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So when I was asked to give this welcoming, I spent some time reflecting on my early memories of collaborative futures. And I want to say it's been over a decade since the word collaborative futures came into my vocabulary. I think it was 2013 or 2014 when I was acting AUL at Western, where I attended a summit day called Collaborative Futures in Toronto. And the point of the day was to reflect on what we could do as a consortia that is radical. What is radical collaboration? And the outcome of that day was to get a shared ILS. And look at where we've come so far. From those early days, well over a decade ago, we picked an ILS. We now have, over the past 5 years since we went live in 2019, we've adopted a common user interface and experience called Omni. We've aligned borrowing practices in terms of service across libraries. We've enabled users to directly request academic materials across the province and have them delivered wherever they want, to the choice of their location of their choice. We have a shared management. We have shared management of shared catalog records. We've developed shared analytics to help us understand and better manage and steward the Ontario-wide collection. A lot of this takes a lot of work and a lot of capacity and a lot of labor. 246 Ontario University Library employees contribute expertise across 23 institutional committees, cross-institutional committees and working groups. And 131 knowledge building events, such as this one, have been hosted by OCUL with 7,568 attendees. It's a lot of labor, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of effort. So thank you for coming, making the time today to come to this fourth mini conference. They've been so successful because I think they've been so successful. This is a great way for us to share our learning. I think knowledge sharing and learning it together is really important. Sharing our experiences with Alma, Primo VE, and Omni. And today, attendees are from across OCUL and from CLO, the College Libraries Ontario. So welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people here today. 136 participants I can see right now. It's fantastic. I want to acknowledge and thank the speakers for taking the time to contribute to today. Kevin Burke from Carleton, Michael Walker from OCUL, John Dingle from Brock, Courtney Bremer and Melissa St. Marie from Waterloo, Susan Don from University of Toronto, and Annika for opening and closing today's event. I also want to thank the organizers. CFCOM, the Collaborative Futures Communications Committee, coordinated and organized this event. Kim Ash from Brock chairs this committee. Sylvia Nugent from Ottawa is on it. Scott Turner from Carleton. And Annika and Katrina Fortner from OCUL also are members of this committee. So thank you for organizing this event and gathering all of us together today. So as I said earlier, the work that is done, the 246 cross-institutional committees and working groups is what it takes to make decisions across our collaborative network. And 131 knowledge building events with 7,568 attendees. That's a lot of labor and a lot of commitment. I want to acknowledge how much work it takes for Collaborative Futures to exist, for resource sharing to exist. So many people are involved to make this happen. I sometimes reflect on the amount of work people are doing for OCUL, for CF, that's not directly part of their job. Some institutions, in some institutions, it might be considered service, but there is an aspect to volunteering to be on these committees. And although it might be service or additional work, all of it is crucial for maintaining and advancing our collaboration. There's so many ways to engage, and thank you all for doing so. Thank you for everyone who's attending today, because this is work and labor. It takes time and effort to set aside to attend mini conferences like this. Thank you to everyone who's attended CF drop-ins and meetings. Thank you to the CF Steering Committee, which is comprised of 3 directors, OCUL staff, and the chairs of the subcommittees. Thank you to the chairs of the subcommittees. That's a fair bit of work, because not only are you running your committee, but you're also attending CF Steering Committee. And thank you to all of the members of all of the subcommittees and working groups. Thank you to everyone, even who's submitted a ticket or engaged in drop-ins, because that's all labor that is required to make a successful collaboration. All of this takes time, and I do worry sometimes that this work is not visible, but I want to say it is visible. We know it happens. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we all see all of this work, and it's really important to how work gets done to support this collaboration. And the benefit is really for our users. Our users benefit, our researchers benefit, our students benefit. It's pretty incredible. So as chair of CFSC, I get to see the chairs of the subcommittees talk about all of their projects. I don't have time in this welcome to acknowledge all of the work, which is significant, that all of these committees do, but I wanted to pick one thing from each of the subcommittees that I think is a highlight. The accessibility committee. This accessibility subcommittee, in my mind, is keeping accessibility at the fore. It's not always easy to make time for accessibility initiatives. We're all stretched thin, but this group helps keep accessibility work active and meaningful. We have CFCOM. The obvious one right now is this very committee. This committee planned the CF mini conference, which is not a small feat. CF Ducks, one standout for me with CF Ducks, the discovery and user experience, was that they did an assessment of an AI tool in Primo, the research assistant, and actually recommended we don't use it for the time being. But we'll monitor it, and as it improves, we might reconsider that. But that was a huge project with a great outcome. The Metadata Management and Standards Committee, CFMMS, what comes to mind for me is the thoughtfulness and the conscientiousness within which this group operates. The leadership that they have demonstrated as they respond to the Library of Congress subject heading changes and reparative descriptions is impressive. The Strategic Projects Group, what comes to mind is the work that they're thinking about and doing on how best to use the network zone. The Shared Resources Committee, what comes to mind is all of the network zone ERM work, and that a subcommittee that reports to this group recommended that OCUL changes its model for supporting network zone ERM work, and that the work becomes more centralized instead of a distributed model. So we're working on that. And then finally, the Systems and Analytics Group, they lead and facilitate conversations about the quarterly roadmap updates. All of this work from all of these committees and subcommittees that too many to mention are crucial to the functioning of this collaboration, which again benefits our users enormously. So tying back to the reflections at the beginning, when I think back to my very first summit called Collaborative Futures, where we were talking about radical collaboration, and this shared ILS was non-existent, and we were all on different systems. I'm amazed at how much has changed in the past decade, especially 5 years. When I think about moving forward, now that there's more people on this network, the possibilities I think are amazing. I think we can continue to build and collaborate. And I also have a lot of hope for the future. And my wish for OCUL is that we continue with our spirit of radical collaboration and move all of that forward. So I'm really looking forward to these speakers, and I hope you all enjoy the day. Thank you for coming.
Thanks very much, Nicole. You're just going to stop sharing, and I will hand over to Kimberly Ash for our first block.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Ash. I'm a librarian at Brock University, and I'll be the moderator for the first half of the mini conference. And our first presenter is Kevin Burke from Carleton University. And their presentation is Carleton University's Better Record Project, sharing progress and future goals. It's all yours, Kevin.
Excellent. Thank you. Just bear with me a moment. I'll get my slides up. Everything look good on your end? Great. All right. So yes, thank you for the introduction, Kimberly and Annika, and thank you for your words of welcome, Nicole. I want to thank you for having me today. Like Kimberly mentioned, my name is Kevin Burke. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm what I'm calling the new-ish metadata analyst at Carleton. I just hit the 1-year mark here. So today I'm going to be presenting on what Alex Fletcher lovingly dubbed Carleton's Better Record Project. If you're on the CF metadata listserv, you may have seen some emails coming through with some updates on this, but today I wanted to give kind of a more complete overview of the work that we've been doing so far, and also a little bit of what we have planned for the future. I want to start off with the land acknowledgement. I always think this is extra important when we're meeting online because, like Nicole mentioned, we're joining from so many different territories. So today I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation in what is currently known as Ottawa, Canada. I'm a settler on this territory with family roots in Great Britain and Ireland. I've had the privilege to live and work uninvited on this territory, but also on several others, including recently the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples on the west coast, and also the Mi'kmaq on the east coast. So for today's presentation, I want to start by giving a little bit of context for the project. Mainly what this project is focused on is working with legacy records that we at Carleton have left over from many, many years and several migrations. These are data that need updating, but we're causing quite a few problems for us that I'll get into a little bit later. So I'm going to give a bit of a background. I'll walk through the workflow that we developed for phase 1 of this project, which was completed about 6 months ago, and review some of the results of that phase. And then, because work on this project is ongoing, I'm also going to give a little overview of some of the stuff we've been working on recently and what we have planned for the future, as well as some related projects we've been working on that have reused parts of this workflow or have been kind of spurred on by the work that we've done. And I'm going to do my very best to leave a lot of time for questions at the end. So, in terms of context, like I mentioned, this work deals mainly with legacy data. So just some terminology before we get started, in case anyone's not familiar or needs a refresher. We're in, an Alma system. So Carleton's institution zone, the IZ, is our local instance. It houses the records that we manage ourselves and aren't shared with collaborative futures. The network zone is the shared instance of Alma that holds all of the shared records that we, as collaborative futures members, can all access, edit, use, and put holdings on and remove holdings from. The important thing to know is that if you're working with batch updating any network zone records, that has to be done in the network zone instance of Alma. It can't be done from the institution zone instance unless you're only dealing with local fields. So in terms of our legacy data, Carleton was an early adopter of online cataloging. We had many years ago a locally developed ILS called Cube. Because the system was locally developed, it relied on local practice and a high degree of customization. We believe this is where the 690 aspect of this project came from. You may hear me refer to these records as the 690 records because all of the subject headings were in the 690 local field. We believe this is a holdover of local practice from Cube. The records that were from Cube no longer meet our minimal standards for records. So there's a large number of these records that are essentially missing controlled subject headings or have very sparse data in other areas. And these records have persisted through several migrations. So through a migration to Millennium around 2001, Sierra in 2013, and then finally to Alma around 2019, 2020. On the migration to Alma, we ended up holding these records back from the network zone because we knew that they didn't meet the standards for records that we wanted to share with other collaborative futures institutions. And we also ended up removing them from our regular updates to WorldCat. So we moved any existing OCLC numbers from the 035 field to a local 095 and removed these records from our publishing jobs entirely. Overall, these records have been the project of several manual cleanup projects, especially from 2020 to 2024. But we knew that manual cleanup wasn't necessarily going to cut it. So we come to the situation in 2024, which is when I joined Carleton. At this point, we had about 100,000 legacy records remaining. There was a manual cleanup project underway looking at the most recent records, but we knew that the sheer number of records meant that manual cleanup just wasn't feasible for us. Luckily, with the creation of the metadata analyst role, it created a capacity for us to get more deeply involved in batch processing and work to develop a way to revise a lot of these records en masse. So we began a batch processing project in August 2024, and we were able to complete phase 1 in about December 2024 with a little bit of cleanup left to go in January. So phase 1 of that project, we were working with records that had OCLC numbers. So like I mentioned, we did have some records that had OCLC numbers. We moved them into a local field. There'd been some issues over the years where OCLC numbers had been added, removed, things like that. So overall a complicated situation, but we did have some data to work with. Basically, we developed the workflow for this phase iteratively over several months, so August through December. One of the things that we knew we wanted to do was keep the majority of the work that we were doing outside of Alma. We worked outside of Alma in order to protect the integrity of our current records as well as any shared records, so that any changes we were making, we knew we'd be able to roll back. I often say it's a lot easier to hit Control-Z and mark edit than it is in Alma. So it was really important for us that we isolate our records before we do any kind of batch process where we weren't 100% sure of what the results would be. So the basic overview of this workflow is that we took the records from Alma and used those OCLC numbers to pull matching records from WorldCat via Z3950. Those matching records were deduplicated, cleaned, and we extracted improved records. We merged our existing records with the improved records, and then had to develop a workflow for checking how confident we were in the quality of those matches. And then we loaded our records, the new records, into our institution zone and shared them with the network zone, and then ran the deduplication process in the network zone. And as you'll see, just the very start and end of the workflow happened in Alma. Everything else happened outside of Alma with tools like MarcEdit, Excel, and also some custom-built Python scripts. So to give a bit of a kind of walkthrough of the workflow, we focused on using all of the existing OCLC numbers from these legacy records. So out of 100,000 records, roughly half of them had some kind of valid OCLC number. That's data in an 035 or 095 field that had a valid OCLC prefix. Of those records, we were able to extract all of the OCLC numbers and use them for searching in WorldCat to retrieve matching versions. We used MarcEdit's Z3950 utility to search for these records, and we used, like I mentioned, all of the valid as well as the canceled or invalid OCLC numbers when retrieving records. We had originally tested this procedure using only valid numbers, but because our legacy records are often incomplete or outdated, we found that we were getting better results when using all of the numbers overall. We retrieved all the records and saved them, but obviously because we were using both valid and invalid numbers, we did end up pulling in a number of duplicate records. So the first step of our cleaning then was to deduplicate all of these records. So basically we took the WorldCat records, loaded them into MarcEdit, and used MarcEdit's built-in deduplication tool to remove all the duplicate records. Then we had to clean up the subject headings. So we based our approach off of Collaborative Future's acceptable subject thesauri policy from 2019, which I'm not quite sure either has been or will soon be replaced with a more up-to-date policy. But this meant that we kept headings from vocabularies such as LCSH, CSH, LCGFT, RVM, FAST, MESH, while removing uncontrolled headings, as well as headings from vocabularies we don't typically use, such as Getty, or non-English or French vocabularies like GND, SWD, etc. We were able to assume that any records that had 6XX fields left after this process were improved in some way. So because our records had only 690, when they were shared to WorldCat, those local fields wouldn't be maintained in the WorldCat record. And so we were able to say that any records that were coming in that had a 600 field, it had either been added by another institution or added through OCLC's merging and deduplication process. By extracting these records, this left us with a set of current WorldCat versions that matched our legacy records based on OCLC numbers. And I believe Alex put a note in the chat about that new policy. So with our set of improved records, we decided to merge our records in WorldCat instead, or not WorldCat, sorry, in MarcEdit instead of Alma in order to preserve, again, the integrity of our records in Alma. So using OCLC numbers as the match point, which involved the 001, 019, and 035 fields, we used the OCLC version as the base record and developed a custom merge rule to carry over Carleton's local data, including our MMS ID or record ID, as well as any local fields that we wanted to retain, things like local notes about our particular version of the resource, or notes about donation status, things like that. Since not all of the records were merged in the match process, we did have to extract any records that had not matched. We did find that at each stage of this process, we did encounter some loss. This is just kind of unavoidable, I think, when you're dealing with inconsistent or incomplete records. So to do this, we just extracted any records from the merged set that had one of Carleton's record IDs attached in the 001 field. And this gave us a kind of final set for upload after a little bit more basic cleanup. Things like fixing indicators where a 0 had been swapped for a null, which was quite common, or the other way around, as well as records with unsorted fields, blank lines, all those kinds of little messy things that we just didn't want to maintain. However, because our original records were so inconsistent and incomplete, we realized pretty quickly that we needed a way to confirm that the new version of the record was actually referring to the same version of the resource as the original version of the record. Ideally, this would have been done manually, but with about 50,000 pairs of records to go through, that was just a little bit too much work for us to do. So we ended up developing a Python script that let us compare the records across certain key fields. So we used O20 for ISBN, 1XX fields for main entry, 245 for title, 250 for edition statements, 260 and 264 for publication information. This was especially important because our records were so old. They were pre-RDA, and so a lot of the WorldCat records we were pulling in had been upgraded to RDA from AACR2, and so we needed to compare across those fields, as well as the 300 field physical description, just because it helped kind of flag any issues where the other data may be quite similar, but the physical description was vastly different. Or a common issue in the incoming records was that they were missing the 300 field, which was quite frustrating. By spot checking some of the record pairs that this script flagged as being low confidence matches, we were able to determine that anything with a score of around 67% similarity or above was likely to be a good match, and anything below that would require manual review. Using this script, we were able to automatically approve about 95% of the record pairs we generated, which left about 2,500 pairs overall to review. And of those, about 500 or so ended up being actual errors that we needed to pull from the set before uploading. So then we get to loading these records into Alma. So we've now pulled better versions of these records from WorldCat. We've merged them with our existing ones to maintain our local data, and we have these records ready to upload. But uploading is where things got a little bit difficult. So when you load a record into Alma and try to load into the network zone, it uses the network zone's existing version of a record, if one exists, as the preferred form of that record, and it will merge the incoming record into that one. Now, this meant that we were losing a lot of data from these records. Because we'd recently pulled these records from WorldCat, they were, on the whole, more current and more complete than other legacy versions from our catalog or from other institutions' catalogs. So we had to develop a workflow that would let us load the records into the network zone without losing our data. So to do that, we ended up loading the records into our institution zone first. We were able to use the MMS ID as the match point, which meant that each incoming record had exactly one perfect match in our catalog, which was much nicer than trying to match with OCLC number or another field that can be a little messier. And then we were able to share the records into the network zone by using an unconfigured match profile. So the multi-step match configuration, it's called, if you don't set it up in your Alma configuration, when you use it to share records into the network zone, it just skips matching entirely. So that was a bit of a godsend for us. We kind of lucked out into that because it let us take our records, share them into the network zone without even trying to match them on existing records, so that we were sure that nothing was going to be overwritten without our kind of say-so. Now, obviously, because we disabled that matching and merging, we ended up loading a number of duplicate records into the network zone. So the final step in this process was to run a deduplication process. So this followed the usual kind of workflow that Collaborative Futures uses in the network zone for deduplication. Alex Fletcher walked me through this a lot, and it was very helpful. But basically, we took all of the records that we'd uploaded, checked for duplicate records in the network zone, and then ran a merge and combine process using Carleton's version of the record as the preferred form. Because our records were typically more complete and more current than any existing records, we decided to treat ours as the preferred version and merge other institutions' holdings into our records. Again, there was an issue with some low confidence matches, so we did have to do some more manual review, and we were able to refer some records to other institutions for clarification or correction as needed. So for our results for this process, it was really quite successful. We were able to load over 48,000 records into the institution zone and share them into the network zone. So these were records that before had been quite sparse and only kept in our IZ, and now were much more complete and shared with the network zone. Of these 48,000, about half were completely new to the network zone, and about the same amount were pre-existing, but we were able to merge them and presumably update the majority of them. This also meant that we added over 300,000 subject access points to our catalog that previously had either been missing or completely uncontrolled and in a local field. But it does still leave about half of our legacy records left to update. So that's where we get to phase 2, and I'm going to kind of blast through this so we have some time for questions. But basically now we're looking at records that don't have OCLC numbers or don't have good matches with OCLC numbers. So as I mentioned, there's about 50,000 of these left. We've considered some other match points. Kind of our best option is probably the Library of Congress control number, but that's only present in a small number of the records. So we're also exploring other options for retrieving records through WorldCat. This includes building a Python script to extract data from records to build queries for Z3950, such as the Library of Congress control number, ISBN fields, author, title, publisher, publication information, as a way to build queries to retrieve records. Now, we did do some preliminary testing, and I would say we had very mixed results. Depending on the query we constructed and the original set of records we used, we had return rates on our queries of between 6% and 70%. So currently this work is on hold as we work on some other projects, but we're hoping in the fall to get back into this and kind of refine this process and make it a little more practical overall. Now, we've also been able to apply this work to other projects, including other kind of smaller cleanup projects for legacy records, and things like linking records to the network zone that should have been linked but weren't, which is an issue we've seen come up with the automated fulfillment process. So we were able to kind of repeat this with smaller sets of records as a way to improve our records and then link them to the network zone without losing any of our local data. We're also working on some other batch update projects, such as implementing WorldCat's update service, which provides versions of records that have been updated that your institution has holdings on a regular basis. So we can hopefully keep our records up to date with changes made in WorldCat on an ongoing basis. And we are also currently working on cleaning up our holdings in WorldCat. As I believe I mentioned earlier, we did have some kind of issues over the years where some records were published, sometimes we removed OCLC numbers, sometimes we added them. And this meant that some of our holdings in WorldCat are a little out of sync with what we actually have. So over the summer, we're running a streamlined holdings update to fully clear any existing holdings data and make sure that what goes in is exactly what we want to have there. And we're also hoping that this will help flag some of those records where they're failing WorldCat's validation, or they may be failing WorldCat's matching process. So with that, I do want to give a couple quick shout outs to some colleagues for their help with this. So Emma Cross and Angela Hayward here at Carleton were really helpful in figuring out some of the background on where these legacy records came from and what that meant. And then Jennifer Browning, my boss here at Carleton, Aaron Borgard at Western, and Alex Fletcher at OCUL for all of their help developing this workflow, and especially the network zone portion. And with that, I'll say thank you. On this slide, you have my email and a link to my GitHub where I share most of the scripts that I use in my batch update work. So feel free to check things out there and let me know if you have any questions. And I believe we have some time for questions because I've blasted through that. So I'll stop sharing and we'll check the chat.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Yeah, we have 2 questions in chat. Sarah, who says they're a non-cataloger, has a question. Where records were discarded, is it possible that there are now things on the shelves that lack records?
Fantastic question. Sorry, I was a little unclear about that. So when I'm talking about discarding the records, that's just from the set that I was uploading. So we kept all of Carleton's legacy records active in Alma throughout the whole process. So anything that failed in this process, anything that didn't match or where we discarded a record, we still have the legacy record live. It's just that we removed it from the set before we loaded the new records.
And we have a question from Matt, who also says, or also recognizes this is a mountain of work that you've done, and is wondering how many people in your department worked on this cleanup, and was it a portion of the department or was everybody involved?
So primarily it was kind of a small team. I did most of the legwork in our department. I definitely got a lot of advice and help from my colleagues. One thing worth noting is that kind of the most complicated part, the longest part, was manually reviewing the record pairs. Because like I mentioned, we had 2,500 pairs. I developed a Python script that let us display them side by side. And it just meant comparing, like, there's the old one, there's the new one. Is it actually the same thing? So that definitely took the longest. And we were lucky enough to have some placement students from a local library tech diploma program who were able to kind of come in and help us out a bit with that. Because that part did take probably several months of kind of on and off work.
Wow, several months. It's nice to have help with students, though. Yeah, if there's any other questions, you're welcome to type them into chat, or you can raise your hand. If you're still thinking about questions, there will be a Q&A for all presenters at the end of the conference too. So if you're still thinking about a question, you can keep it until then as well. Ooh, we have a couple more. First one, how does the OCLC service update service work? Will local notes be erased is the first question.
Fantastic question. So the OCLC updates service is something done through the WorldShare Record Manager. It delivers a complete set of records where you have holdings that have had updates applied to them. There is a way to customize the set it works with, but I've been having some difficulty with that. So that might need a little tweaking. Basically, when we're talking about loading records from WorldCat updates, we're able to build our own merge rule in Alma. So we can be very specific about what fields are actually carried over. So I'm working on a merge rule right now that focuses only on the fields that OCLC actually uses for matching. We've been having a problem with our OCLC publishing where some of the records we send through aren't matching on existing OCLC records. And so they're creating new records, and we end up with duplicates in WorldCat with duplicate holdings as well. So the idea is if we are able to pull these updated versions from WorldCat, carry over only the fields that OCLC uses to match with WorldCat records, we should be able to kind of prevent that mismatch while still maintaining our local data. When we're merging, we do also have the option between either replacing fields or adding fields. So we can do things like add subject headings so that we're not necessarily losing any that we've added, especially things like local headings, or like we've been doing a lot of work adding homosaurus headings to our records here at Carleton. And so that's something we wouldn't want to lose by merging records indiscriminately.
Our next question is, how can we scale this to upgrade more records in the network zone?
Fantastic question. So that's another thing we've been working on. I'm sit on the network zone metadata maintenance working group. It's a mouthful. I always forget. It's a very long acronym. And so we're working on like a joint data sync process that will help with kind of publishing and deduping our records in the network zone. I'm hoping this WorldCat updates process is something that we can apply more broadly as well. And then parts of this process are definitely things that can be applied by other institutions in terms of like how to share records into the network zone without losing your local data. I know that's been a kind of stumbling point for several institutions. So ways that we can get more records into the network zone and dedupe from there. I think that's a kind of the key takeaway for me with how we can improve network zone records on the whole.
And our last question, did you document your process?
Yes, I forgot. I should have mentioned. So we do have full workflow documentation. We have all the scripts available. And so we'll be sharing that. I believe we're still trying to figure out the best way to share that out. Right now it's sitting in the network zone metadata working groups Google Drive, but we do have documentation available, and I also have some documentation and kind of explanations available if anybody has specific questions about the process.
Well, we've got another last minute question that snuck in here. Is there any issue with sharing OCLC records into the network zone?
Great question. Yes and no. So this, I think, kind of touches on something that did come up in this process and has come up in a lot of my other work too, which is a question around how we're actually handling the idea of collaborative cataloging. And so when we share a record to the network zone, there's kind of a question around who owns that record. Is that record something that's managed locally? Is that something that's managed consortially? Or is that something that we're using from WorldCat? So when we brought in these records and shared them into the network zone, we were sharing the versions from WorldCat. We determined that, in the majority of cases, this was a net gain. There may be some small instances where we did end up losing a little bit of data here or there. We can pretty safely say that wasn't the case, but with any kind of large scale process, there's always the risk that you have noise or loss at some point. I would say, yes, there's a little ambiguity around what's local, what's shared, what's global. And so that can be a little tricky to navigate, but I know is it the Strategic Projects Committee is working kind of on a more strategic approach to use of the network zone. The network zone working group is working on some resources that kind of clarify where that line is drawn over who owns what and who's able to update what. So hopefully, as we get a little more policy in place, that kind of gray area will shrink a little more, and we'll be all a little more confident in what our metadata are doing.
And Alex just confirmed CF Special Projects is working on working in the network zone space project.
I love to hear that. That's very exciting to me. Because yes, it is a question that comes up of if I'm going to be touching other institutions' records, what's the correct approach? And so I do try to be very careful about that and not, go ham.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for your presentation and for answering everybody's questions. We're like perfectly on time. So we'll move on to our next presenter. Thanks again, Kevin.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everybody.
So our next presenter is Michael Walker from OCUL, and their presentation is OCUL Interlibrary Loan Request Form Update. So the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you. Can you see the PowerPoint all good?
Yes.
All good.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me present. My name is Michael, and I am a co-op student at OCUL. I work as a programmer, and I'm proud to present a major project that I've been working on called the Interlibrary Loan Request Form Update. Let us begin. So I'll talk a bit about what the interlibrary loan form is. It is an OCUL form that allows OCUL email partners to create lending requests to OCUL libraries. And the way it works right now is when the email partner fills out the form and submits a request, the request gets sent to the OCUL library as an email. The email has all the details of everything that the email partner typed. So then what the OCUL library staff have to do is they have to copy the information and paste it into Alma. If you'd like to take a look at the form, I have the link at the bottom left. If not, that's okay. I have a screenshot of what the form looks like on the right. Basically just has some background information, some instructions, and some fields like the library code and library name, etc. So let's talk a bit about how we get from the form to Alma. So at the bottom of the slides, I have a diagram that shows the sequential workflow of getting a lending request from the form to Alma. It has 5 steps. Each step is represented as a text box, and there's an arrow pointing to the next step. And there's no branching paths, so it's just all in one line. And it begins with the email partner submitting their request using the form. which then gets sent as an email to the OCUL school that they requested from. Once the resource sharing staff member sees that email, they will they'll go to Alma and create a lending request. The first step they have to do once they do that is they have to attach the item that's being requested, and and what the resource sharing staff has to do is they have to use the information from the email to search for the requested item. Once they find the item, they attach it to that create lending request page, and then they have to fill out that page with some other information. For example, there's the partner code and the required by date. And once they fill all of that out and submit that, now finally the request appears in Alma. So this is quite a bit. This takes a lot of steps, especially when all of that information is in that email. Like, you'd wish it would appear right in Alma, but instead you have to do all this copy and paste work. It's pretty tedious. And it doesn't help that there are quite a few failure points because there's a possibility of human error in every step. Let's take a look at some major failure points here. So first, the requester can enter incorrect details, and this can mess up the request. Like, you can accidentally type in the wrong call number and the wrong title, and bam, you get the wrong item. Sometimes the email can be missed with all the request information. You might accidentally select the wrong copy, or you choose a copy of an item that's very similar to the one that was requested. You can make some copy and paste mistakes. Maybe you miss a letter, or maybe you paste a piece of information into the wrong field in the Alma create lending request page, which isn't organized like the email. It's in a different order. And the worst of all, it just takes too long. It's a pretty tedious process, as I said. And just to show that, I have a picture of a section of an example request email on the right here. This was an item that was requested to Queens, and it has some details about the requested item, like the title, the call number, and the ISBN. And you basically have to copy all of these pieces of information and paste it into Alma. And this is just a section, so imagine the full request that you have to copy and paste. It's not a fun process. So this is what I set out to try to fix. So let's talk about the update now. This is the workflow after the update. If you take a look at the bottom, there's a diagram that's very similar to one that was shown a few slides ago. It is another sequential workflow update. It is another sequential workflow, but instead of there being 5 steps, it now just shows 2 steps. So we basically go right from submitting, the email partner submitting a request from the form, straight to the request now appears in Alma. That is essentially what the update is. And the way we've accomplished this was we used a thing called an API, which basically lets you obtain and write information programmatically outside of Alma. Now, Ex Libris has an API for Alma, which is what we use to be able to take each piece of information typed in the form and paste it right into Alma as a new request. And not only does it do that, it also uses the unique item identifier called the MMS ID, which is found in the catalog URL, to automatically search for the exact item that was requested, and attach it to that new request that just appeared in Alma. That's how we were able to get rid of all the the 3 steps in the middle and just go from submit to request now appears in Alma. And the best part, this just takes a few seconds based on my testing. Now let's take a look at how we've solved the failure points that were mentioned previously. So first, the requester could type incorrect details. Well, this doesn't matter that much anymore because the MMS ID is used to automatically grab the correct item. So you don't have to depend on what was typed to search for the item. The email can be missed. Well, there's no longer an email to be missed because the request shows right up in Alma. Shipping the wrong copy, well, like mentioned before, the MMS ID is used to automatically grab the exact item that was requested. Copy and paste mistakes, the update automatically fills out the information in Alma to the correct spot. So there's no need to worry about copy and pasting. And it takes too long. Well, compared to the minutes it took before, this just takes a few seconds.
2 minutes left.
Yep. For some exceptions, the API needs some valid MMS ID and partner code for it to take 2 steps, but that's okay because this is still the exceptions are still better than what it was like before the update. If the MMS ID is invalid or it's not in the URL, then the request will still appear in Alma, but as locate failed, so the resource sharing staff will need to attach the item, but there's still no need to copy and paste. But if the API fails or the partner code is invalid, then it sends an email just like before the update. However, it will be easy to detect partner code typos or an invalid partner code because this will be very rare. It'll be very rare for an email to be sent. And for testing, we've tested thoroughly with OCUL libraries. And the libraries that we've tested with are Queen's University, McMaster, U of T, which is not part of the network zone, and Carleton, who uses Rapido. So this shows that the update works well in any scenario. And one last exciting thing, this will be released tomorrow. Yep. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I can now answer some questions.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Yep.
Oh, we've got comments coming in. They're excited that it's happening tomorrow. If you have any questions for Michael, feel free to type them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask verbally. It's always great to see a process get streamlined and made easier and save people a lot of time. And I'm sure I'm already thinking of some colleagues who is probably going to save them a lot of time in their work. Oh, everyone's saying thank you and nice work.
I appreciate all the kind words.
Oh, somebody said that you're a superstar and you're also helping us with refining our joint OCLC data sync process. Look at you go.
Yeah. You did a good presentation, Kevin. Yeah.
Oh, lots of thanks. Everyone's just so appreciative of all the work that you've done.
Yeah, I appreciate all the kind words as well.
All right, if there's no questions, feel free to keep telling Michael how awesome he is. And we will take a break and we'll have a little bit of a longer break. We're going to return at 10:45 for the next half of the conference. So thanks everyone for your questions and your comments, and we'll see you in a little bit at 10:45.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Scott Turner from Carleton University. I'll be the moderator for the second half. Our next speaker up is John Dingle of Brock University. And John's presentation is entitled All of Our Problems, Summarizing 3 Years of Brock's Omni Report a Problem Form. So over to you, John.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. Can that guy just get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay and see the slides?
Yeah, well, looks good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone being here. My name's John. I'm the metadata librarian at Brock University, and yeah, I'm here to present about our Omni Report a Problem form, which has been up for just over 3 years now, and a recent project we did to go back and look at those 3 years of problems and see the kinds of issues that people are running into when they use our Omni. So I'll start with just a little bit more background about the form and the project that we did to look back at those issues. I'll get into a summary of what we found, focusing on some of the questions that are on the slide there. And then time permitting, I'll talk about some of the actions we've taken in response to the reports that we were seeing submitted. As a disclaimer, it's going to be statistics. There's going to be some graphs, some charts and tables, but less in the way of sort of strong conclusions about what it all means or what to do. So just keep that in mind throughout. Okay, so a little bit more about the form. So it was implemented in March 2022. My former colleague Dan gave a presentation about this at the 2022 mini conference about how the form itself is set up. This is what it looks like in Omni. So on every full record in Omni, there's a little report problem button, which pops up a form that a user can submit if they're running into any kind of an issue. When they do submit it, it generates an email to ERM staff to investigate and then follow up with the person reporting the problem. And it also logs that report to a spreadsheet, which has been building up since the form went live, and we thought this was a good opportunity to look back. So we look back over exactly 3 years worth of problems to analyze, which was 476 reports. So what's in the reports from the user? We get a description of the problem in their words, as well as their email, so we can follow up with them. The form automatically pulls in some information about the page where they're reporting the issue from. And then as we're troubleshooting as ERM staff, there's a column to add in our notes on what the problem is and how we were able to resolve it or not. So that's kind of what we started with. Some of the additional analysis we did on top of what was in the spreadsheet already. We wanted to know sort of broadly what types of issues people are encountering. So we developed a list of 14 different problem types. So is it a metadata problem? Is it the user's browser cache? I don't have time to sort of go through all those problems and explain, but there is a full list and sort of definitions we used in the appendix at the end of these slides. And sort of when we were putting together that list, it was building on some of the work done by those projects I've linked to there, which have done sort of more rigorous, systematic projects to analyze their own ERM system tickets. So once we had that list of 14 types, we being myself and one of my colleagues on the ERM team, so Tanya Sicoli, thank you very much, Tanya, once again for doing this. But we both went through, we categorized each report as one of those 14 types, and then where we had differed, we resolved those differences. So there's a couple of measures here just about how strong our original agreement was, and it was pretty strong, but by no means perfect in terms of the categories we assigned. So that's one thing. We assigned a problem type for each problem reported. We then wanted to know kind of, broadly who we sort of felt was responsible for the problem. Is it an issue on our end within the library or within Brock? Is it sort of ex libris, a different vendor, or is it kind of nobody's fault, just something that happened? And then finally, because we had the email, we can infer what type of user they are. Are they a student? Are they faculty staff? Is it a library staff person? Or if they didn't provide a Brock email, then we sort of classed it as unknown. Okay, so on to some of the things that we found when we did that analysis. So first, just at a high level, how many problems are being reported? So on average, across the 3 years, there were about 13 problems a month. Now, again, that's only problems reported specifically through the Omni forum. Like there's other ways for users to report issues, whether it's through Ask Chat or email. So that's only things reported specifically through the forum. There's variation month to month. So 25 was the most in a month, 6 was the least in a month. And overall, across the 3 years, there was a downward trend. So this is what that looks like in graph form. So every point here is a month. So you can see it varies a bit month to month, starting in June 2022, right up to June of this year. But overall, there is this downward trend from just over 15 to just over 10. And you can see, especially in the last year here, it is noticeably lower. At the outset, I kind of assumed that there'd be a pretty direct relationship between how many reports we were getting and overall Omni usage. So to sort of check on that, I took that same graph and then put Omni usage over top of it to kind of see how much they lined up. And they didn't actually line up quite as strongly as I thought. This was the correlation, which is fairly weak. And you can kind of tell by looking at it, there are places where they line up pretty closely, but in other places they diverge quite a bit. And again, the problem report trend is downwards, whereas the Omni trend is actually pretty consistent across. So our Omni usage overall seems to be pretty consistent, but there is that downward trend for the problem reports. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide just for time, but it does kind of break down, the average by month, as well as by type of semester, whether it's in the winter, summer, or fall, and again with some information about the Omni sessions to sort of see the relationship there. In terms of who submits reports, so this is the breakdown by user group. So about 2/3 are from students, a quarter from faculty or staff, and then 7% library staff, and then there's a few that are unknown. So again, there were 476 in total. Across that 476, there were 355 unique submitters, 293 users submitted only one report, and there were 7 who submitted 5 or more. So yeah, I guess my takeaways from this is it does seem like we're getting a pretty good range of people submitting reports. We have a few people that submit quite a few, but there's lots that are just submitting once. So yeah, to me it seems like we're getting a good range of people submitting reports. Now
sorry, 2 minutes left.
Sure,
John?
thanks. This is where we get into the different types of problems that we're seeing. The top type of problem is people having an issue with their browser cache. So those are issues where people are running into an error, but really all they need to do to resolve it is to use a private or incognito mode or clear their browser cache. It's kind of the ARM equivalent of turning it off and on again. And that's by far our biggest type of problem. And you can see going down the list here the different kinds of categories that there are. But again, the biggest, most noticeable trend here was just the different types, or sorry, the total going down in the final year, and that was kind of across all the different types of problems. In terms of who's responsible, about half we said kind of nobody's fault, and then the rest was kind of divided fairly equally between us in the library, Ex Libris, or a different vendor. Okay, I'll go quickly through this section just in terms of the actions that we've taken. The first thing, just based on some of the problems we were seeing, we added kind of an FAQ with some common problems and fixes to the forum itself. So these are some of the problems that we added. Again, the top one being that message to clear a browser cache, signing into Omni. Maybe if you get to a landing page that doesn't have the article you're looking for, to search on that page. I was curious to see if this worked at all. In this case, it seemed like the answer is probably no in terms of getting people to clear their browser cache. The percentage that were browser cache related actually went up after we implemented that. Another thing we did would be to where specific collections kept coming up, we added public notes to sort of warn that there may be issues with that particular collection. Sorry, I keep I keep changing the slides when I don't mean to. These are some of the specific collections that we added notes for. And then finally, to sort of improve the issues that relate to the proxy server, working with our library systems and technology who actually manage the proxy server, we implemented a new workflow for sort of more regularly updating proxy stanzas. And in this case, again, I don't want to draw too strong a conclusion, but this is one case where it did seem like the reports of that specific issue went down. There's such a small number that it's hard to draw any firm conclusions. But I guess not a bad thing to see that the number went down. Okay, so my final slide here, just in terms of final thoughts and things that that stood out. Again, the most notable trend was just that drop in year 3. And I, again, don't want to read too much into that. Who knows if it'll spike back up again in the next year, but it was pretty consistent across the first 2 years, dropped quite a lot in the 3rd year. For me, just a less direct relationship between the number of reports and Omni usage. And then our biggest problem is just the people needing to clear browser cache. So how to sort of effectively communicate or address that issue. And just throwing out a question just for people that do have similar forums at their institution and have a sense of what kinds of problems are coming in. Does this resonate? Does it look broadly similar or different at your institutions? So again, I will stop there and say thank you very much.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, John. We do have a question from Susan Bond, which is, what would you estimate is the proportion of your overall problems that come in using this form? Is this how you receive most of the problem reports? Yeah, I have to say I don't know that off the top of my head. It's probably a good chunk of the sort of users submitted reports. But as I say, we do have, reports come in through Ask Chat. We have a library help email that gets a lot of error reports too. So I don't think I can estimate what proportion come in through the forum, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, John. So perfect timing right up until 11. If anybody does have any follow-up questions, we will have time at the end. But for the time being, it's now time to switch to our next presentation. And we've got Courtney Bremer and Melissa St. Marie from the University of Waterloo, and they will be speaking on making claims count, enhancing workflow efficiency using Alma's claims list. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm just setting up share screen. And 1 second. Okay, you should be able to see just the slide. Is that correct?
Looks good.
Okay, great. All right. Good morning or good afternoon. Well, no, still morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us to learn about claiming in Alma and the cleanup we did to claim more efficiently at the University of Waterloo Libraries. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Additionally, the University of Waterloo's active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated with the Office of Indigenous Relations. Personally, as I continue to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing and being, I'm also reflecting on how I can actively reduce barriers and contribute to reconciliation in meaningful and respectful ways.
Hello, I am Melissa, and I am one of the Acquisitions Associates in the Collection Development Unit for the University of Waterloo Libraries.
And I'm Courtney, and I'm the Electronic Resources Access Manager in Collection Development for University of Waterloo Libraries. Okay, so today we're focusing in this claiming presentation on serials claiming, which was our biggest claiming challenge, and it required the most cleanup. Most of our serials, thankfully, were ordered through EBSCO, which simplified things since we only had to coordinate mainly with one contact. However, if you're doing a similar cleanup with a subscription agent, it's a good idea to give them a heads up as we work through this project. We didn't give them a heads up at first, and we overwhelmed them with quite a few claims as we went through our cleanup. So at the start of this project, I was seconded as the cataloging and metadata librarian overseeing our records and materials. Our claiming process was quite reactive, and we waited for issues to arrive and only claimed when we noticed something was missing at that time, and this was often too late to claim due to the publication frequency. We had no system in place to track missing or stopped issues, which meant we were sometimes paying for subscriptions we weren't receiving at all. It also prevented us from flagging issues to acquisitions that could have led to cancellations or format changes. While each subscription wasn't hugely expensive overall, the cumulative impact on the collections budget was slightly more significant. So in reflecting on the way we were doing our claiming, we knew we needed a more proactive way to manage our claims, and we're aware that Alma had a claiming functionality and list in Alma that you could use. However, we weren't sure how it all worked with the order records. So our goal was to use Alma's claiming features to catch delays within the allowed windows, track missing or inconsistent issues, and identify patterns. It would give the selectors a better idea to support their cancellations or switch to online access. So as we were reviewing print subscriptions that were flagged as in claim in Alma and how to find this, you go to the acquisitions menu and select claims. And here you will get a list of all PO lines in claim, including electronic, print, satellite libraries. And this list isn't the easiest to work from directly. So we filtered it on the POL type we were working with. So in this case, print subscriptions, and then exported to Excel. And then using Excel, it allowed us to track our progress in investigating, add notes, and collaborate with other members working on the claims. We would use VLOOKUP from a new exported list regularly to make sure the one we are working from had those that were no longer in claim removed and ones that didn't exist on the list yet to be added. So how Alma determines something in claim is they use the information from the vendor information section of the order and potentially your items if you use prediction patterns. Alma pays specific attention to the expected receipt date, the claiming grace period, and subscription interval. We will put a link in the chat to the documentation as well. So how Alma figures out when to expect items in a subscription. If there's no expected arrival dates from a prediction pattern or manual entry, Alma will use the subscription interval to estimate when the next item should arrive. And it looks at the last item it does this by looking at the last item received and adds the subscription interval. And if there's a claiming grace period, it will be included in that too. If there are expected arrival dates, Alma will ignore Alma will ignore the subscription interval completely and use the dates that are on the predicted items, along with the claiming grace period. The claiming grace period is a buffer of extra days added to the expected receiving date. And then if the item still hasn't arrived after that time frame, Alma will mark it as in claim on the order. The reclaim interval is also a field in this section of the vendor on the order, but we chose not to use it as it's meant more for the automated letter functionality in Alma, and we do not use that functionality at this time. Also seeing during our cleanup all the complexities of the serials and their frequencies, these letters would have gone out incorrectly many times. So how you get to the cleanup and claiming of claims list. When you're looking at an item in claim from an order, you first want to get an overview of why the resource is in claim. Is it coming from a prediction pattern date? Is it a frequency issue, or is it coming just from the vendor information? Have we received the item recently? Or is the order in claim because it's an ongoing problem, or there's just one missing issue and we've received since? So just to get a better footing around why it's in claim in the first place. And then once you've identified why it's in claim, the next step is to confirm the data from Alma and compare it to the publication and subscription terms of your purchase. And in this case, we would go to EBSCO. So we would start by checking two key fields in EBSCO, the subscription interval and the claiming grace period. These you want to have match in Alma and as well as the publisher's website. And if they don't, you want to update them in Alma accordingly. If the PO line after these changes is still showing in claim, then the next thing to check is the expected delivery date. If that delivery date, if it looks like it's a single issue missing and it aligns with that expected delivery date, then it's likely a true claim. So then you can go ahead and contact your vendor. If the issue is just late and the expected delivery date needs updating based on the publisher's actual release schedule, then you can make a claim. But if it is a match, then it is also a true claim. And if it is just an adjustment that needs to be made, then you can use the change expected date option in the top right of the order in Alma to adjust the expected delivery date, and it will readjust and leave for in claim until that day and the grace period comes again. So a few key things to watch out for when working with prediction patterns is the item in claim a duplicate? So did someone manually enter this item and not notice there was a prediction item sitting there? So if so, you can withdraw the duplication. And then second, you can check for grouped issues. So was the issue part of a multi-issue release and only one item was withdrawn? For example, let's say issues 3 and 4 were released together. If you received both but only withdrew the predicted item for issue 4, the predicted item for issue 3 might still be sitting there unaddressed. So to further explain that, if you received on item 4 and you forgot to delete item 3, issue 3, then that will clean it up as well. So always double check if a predicted item always exists before adding a new one. If you're dealing with multiple issues, make sure all related predicted items are either used or properly deleted. And these small checks can prevent bigger problems down the line and help keep our data clean and accurate. Another thing to double check is if the issue even exists. So check dispatch records online or at the vendor to see if the issue is actually missed. For example, a 6-time-a-year publication, but they only decided to issue 5 that year. You can then withdraw the 6th one because it doesn't exist. So we'll go over the situations where you should involve the acquisitions team. First, if you've submitted multiple claims and haven't received any response, then it's time to escalate. Acquisitions can help follow up with the vendor or the publisher to get things moving. Second, if there's a cost involved because the claim was submitted too late, acquisitions will need to be looped in. They can assess the situation and determine the best course of action, especially if budget approval is required. Third, if the resource has moved to an online format, notify acquisitions because they can verify the access, update the records, and ensure we're not going to continue to claim a print version unnecessarily. Fourth, if the resource has moved to open access, they can confirm the change and make sure we're not paying for something now freely available. And finally, if there is a pattern of missing issues or the publication being delayed, it may be good to alert acquisitions to consider canceling the subscription. In all of these cases, timely communication with acquisitions helps us manage resources efficiently and avoid unnecessary costs. I'll now pass it on to Melissa, who will go over the acquisition side of our claiming cleanup and the workflow they use for the claims process.
Okay, so now shifting a little bit and looking at how acquisitions handles claims. These are some of the steps we took on our end to assist in this process. I will just note that some steps are repeated, but is a second set of eyes and ensures all the bases of the problem are found. Some of these steps also change depending on who the vendor is. For example, if something is direct with the publisher. To start, we check Alma for the following: when the last issue was received, how we have we been invoiced and paid for the items in question, who is our vendor for this subscription, and checking notes on the order. We check notes to see if it has been claimed already, any frequency changes that may have been noted, etc. Next, we check EBSCO. I note EBSCO here because that is where the majority of our subscriptions are through. So we check what the status of the publication is. It could be suspended, delayed, moved to online only, or another status. We also check what the claiming parameters are, if they are available, and also looking at the frequency. There will be notes about changes to that in the title history in EBSCO. And we check to see when the last issue was dispatched. Next, we check the publisher's website. Checking the publisher's website for the most up-to-date publications is also helpful for when you reach out to vendors or direct with publisher about items we haven't received yet. Our last step, once we have investigated as far as we can and believe this to be a true claim, is to reach out to our vendor or directly to the publisher about claiming an item or items. If we get a reply, great. We can then inquire if they will replace or if we will need to repurchase our missing issue or issues, and inform and inquire with the librarian about repurchasing. If we do not get a reply from the publisher, either directly or via our vendor, then we inform the librarian of the situation and in most cases cancel and close the order. Why? Because why continue paying for something we are not being provided? So along the way, we identified some pain points in Alma and also in parts of the process. First, we found that when a subscription is initially set up, Alma presets the receiving date to the date it was set up with a one-day claiming period. Not ideal as this sends items into claim the next day. Secondly, we figured out that if you assign an item to yourself in Alma, it blocks others from being able to do anything in that order, such as updating holdings and closing an order. We also figured out that whoever the item is assigned to, that person is the only one who can release it. Next, we found that because we have affiliated college libraries also in Alma, we need to filter to just our library Dana Porter so that we don't get their claims in the mix as well. Figuring out when and where is the best place to keep notes about certain subscriptions, whether that be in the receiving notes, POL notes, or Excel sheets, without getting things too cluttered in the order or having to check multiple areas to get information. Moving on to vendors' response time. I'm not sure about everyone else here, but sometimes we wait weeks, even months, to get a single reply from vendors. It is usually because they haven't heard anything from the publisher, but updates would be nice. We often have to set reminders for ourselves to check in with them about updates. And lastly, some pain points around parameters, vendor platforms, and challenges with orders that are direct with publishers. Some of our international publishers give very short claiming periods, for example, 30 days, but sometimes we don't receive items until 2 months after the publication date due to shipping. So we end up having to repurchase items or just count it or them as a loss and update our holdings. Claiming in the EBSCOnet platform, it's not always very responsible through the portal. Often we get more communication contacting our reps directly. And subscriptions direct with publisher, some don't send us renewal notices. And even if we put a reporting code on in the Alma to remind us, if the next year's subscription is delayed, now it would likely fall on the librarians to keep tabs and let us know when the next subscription has been published or started. Now, this process wasn't all doom and gloom with problems. We also had many successes. Because of this deep cleaning in claiming, we were able to close several orders, which we would not have found otherwise. Some ended up being discontinued or ceased publications. Some moved to open access. Others switched to online only from print. We also got some orders moving again due to orders getting lost during some migrations and orders that had been delayed or suspended for some time that are now active again. One of the biggest problems we found was the expected receiving dates. As explained earlier, when a new subscription is set up, Alma presets that date to when you set that order up and has a claiming grace of 1 day. To solve this, we thought notes being added in Alma at the time of setup for the receiver to change those dates when we received the first issue was the best process. Because of the found problems, we were able to clean up existing orders for proper claiming going forward, as some subscriptions changed publication timelines that were not communicated via reports we received from our vendors, and also identifying new patterns seen in our receiving lines. So now looking at how we can be more efficient with claiming going forward, here are some things to note. Best practices for working collaboratively with collections maintenance, acquisitions, and our librarians. Once collections maintenance has done their investigating and has identified what they feel is a true claim, and they have claimed or followed up 3 times with no response or direction, they pass it on to the acquisitions team to investigate on their end and follow up with the vendor or publisher one last time. If no response comes with information about our claim, then acquisitions informs the librarian that it is our best interest to cancel and close the order. As for some standards we felt would be useful going forward, one that stood out the most was around communication. We used JIRA forms as a way to communicate issues, new acquisition requests, etc., and felt that this would be a good way for the collections maintenance team to communicate with acquisitions about a claim. This way, communications don't get lost in email inboxes, as I'm sure all of us can understand the never-ending emails and flagged issues. Notes in the purchase order line are also helpful, either in the receiving notes, so the receiver knows what's going on with an item coming in, and also just to keep track of items claimed and last item received, but also in the POL notes at the bottom of the order that the acquisitions team uses most often to communicate information about the order. The Excel sheet is mainly for the collections maintenance team, as they are the first ones to start the claiming process. This sheet is created directly from Alma by exporting the items in claim. This also allows the collections maintenance team to see who is already looking into something. They can assign a claim to themselves and add notes on the status of where that claim is at. I'm now going to pass this back over to Courtney on limitations and next steps for us in the process.
Thanks. So some limitations that we discovered are for items that we don't receive in Alma on the order or at all. So for example, publication inserts, for those, we typically add a receiving note to indicate what the most recent insert received. And since the order is basing everything off an expected delivery date because there are no items, we then have a process in place that we can keep changing the expected delivery date based on the insert frequency so that it'll come back in claim around the time we would expect another insert, just as a nudge to pay attention to see if it's late or not or didn't come at all. Additionally, newspapers, we still have one that we subscribe to, and we don't add any receiving notes. It's a weekly publication. So we've done a similar step that we determine, since it's weekly, we don't want it to come into claim every week. So we decided that we would change the expected date by 2 to 3 months so that we just get a little reminder in the claims list to pay attention. Has it been coming in still, or did it disappear completely? So this way it will come back into the claims upon the calculation time, and then you can check in on it again before it's too late to do anything. So for our next steps, we're going to continue to apply our new proactive guidelines and processes and using our Excel spreadsheet to monitor the claims and finish our cleanup. And then this should help make the claims that come going forward be more accurate claims because we've cleaned up the frequency and the expected dates and the grace periods. So we're going to reevaluate in 6 months to a year to see if there's anything we need to change. We're also going to work on applying these practices to mono series. We also don't receive those on the order. We give them their own record. So what we'd have to do in those cases is if it comes into claim on the order, go and look to see when the last volume or issue of the mono series that we received was. And if it seems to be late, then we will claim as well. But we'll have to fine tune that one a bit more. And also we're going to look at the electronic claims that have come in and build a process. Some issues aren't true claims. If someone marks an activation task as deleted when they're finished with it instead of done, it will not flip to activated on the order and then will come in claim. So just to find out why they're coming into claim in the first place will be one of our next steps as well.
Okay, so thank you for joining us, and we hope the information we have shared with you about utilizing Alma's claiming function will help you with some of your workflows and claiming processes. If you have any questions or feedback for us, we have a few minutes to take those. However, if you think of something later on or need some guidance, feel free to reach out to myself or Courtney.
And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the questions.
Okay, thank you both. That was very informative, much appreciated. We do have plenty of time for questions. So if anybody would like to put something into the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and verbally ask a question.
We must have been very thorough, Courtney.
Or I mean, some of the claiming cleanup we did was quite confusing. So hopefully we did clarify more than confuse.
Not seeing anything coming in for the moment.
Yeah, that's okay. And we will be back on the final Q&A if something comes up later.
Okay, sounds good. I guess we could think about starting early. Susan Bond, are you ready to go, or would you like a few minutes?
I sure
I see
am.
your thumbs up.
I sure am. And my presentation is condensed from a 45-minute presentation that I did at Aluna 2 weeks ago, so I will take the full 15 minutes.
Glad we could help.
Thanks so much.
Okay, terrific. And in the meantime, thank you again, Courtney and Melissa. For those in the audience, if you have any questions for the end, that'd be great to ask them at that point. So much appreciated. Susan Bond, University of Toronto, and Susan will be talking about is deduping a kind of overlap analysis? Can you model it in analytics? Over to you, Susan.
Okay, and you're looking at my slide now?
Looks good.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so thank you for having me today. Thank you all the other presenters. I love this little conference, I think it's great. I'm the Discovery Systems Librarian, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about why I started this project, but really I'm going to abandon that premise pretty quickly. So I'm going to start with an overview of why I started looking at this project in the first place. Then I'm going to go into how my understanding of how deduping works. And then I will dive right into deep into how I looked at it in analytics in detail. I will say my slides, I have a very extensive set of slides, most of which I'm not going to show today. And there was a late breaking update. So I've sent Kimberly the new ones, and soon you'll be able to look at the new ones. So we'll go deep into analytics, and then we'll look at where this work is probably going to go in the future. So this project first started because our local analytics group had been trying to decide what would be the most effective way to do an overlap analysis. There are a bunch of reasons we need to do this. Prior to Alma, we had a number of separate technical services units that all had separate bib records and all had separate OCLC codes. Our migration to Alma in 2021, we went a little bit later than Collaborative Futures did, brought lots of those materials together into shared bib records, but we know there's still a lot of duplication out there. We also, as many of you know, have an offsite storage facility called Downsview that holds the last copy of materials but will not accept second copies. So as we face spatial constraints, we get a lot of requests for reports to see if any items a library has are held at Downsview or at any other location. Seeing what's on the same bib record is relatively trivial, but trying to find other kinds of overlaps, even answering the question of whether a given print title has a digital surrogate, is a real challenge for us. So we convened a working group from our analytics users to explore different tools that might be useful. I will say that we are not using the tool that I'm showing today in our final work. I think we mostly are using KNIME, but we explored a lot of other options. But I knew of a place right within Alma that already does this sort of overlap automagically. So Primo has a complicated algorithm that brings together bibliographic records from Alma that functionally represent the same content. It selects one bib record to show to end users, but brings together all the print and electronic inventory below it. So to answer the first leading question in my title, yes, dedupe is a kind of overlap analysis. It works quietly on the back end of Alma Primo, simplifying the list of results for users and only coming to our attention when it fails by overmatching. That is, bringing things together we want to be viewed separately. It's also possible to turn off or suppress dedupe on individuals or sets of records. We found it sometimes works too well on non-print formats specifically. So for example, we'll bring together a DVD and a Blu-ray of the same movie, but then say that they're both Blu-rays. And similarly with different video game formats. So we've suppressed it on a lot of non-print formats. And we've also suppressed it on titles in all of our rare and special collections. So those richer, weirder bib records are all visible to our users. And then there's a second process that Alma Primo uses to bring records that are alike but not the same, and that's Ferber. In this case, it tells the user that there are multiple versions so they can see the information from each bib, but it still reduces the number of records they get in their initial results list. We don't have this turned on at U of T, actually. So this screenshot is from the York Omni site, so thank you to York for having this turned on. And one thing to note, both of these processes only apply to Alma records, not CDI records. So when you're searching in Omni or Library Search or another Primo, you're searching both the content that's in Alma and the content that's in CDI, and only the Alma records get squished together to like this. There is a separate process in CDI called match and merge that brings those records together, but nothing ever merges from CDI into Alma or vice versa, which is kind of a pretty annoying from an end user standpoint, but it does mean that in theory, we should have all of the information we need in Alma to understand what is going on with dedupe. So how do we know that records are deduped? For individual records, there are a couple of ways. If you just want to see what records are deduped to give you a record you're looking at in Primo, Omni, you can just append this handy bookmarklet to the end of the URL, which is and show pnx equals true. This gives you a peek under the hood. You can look for the is dedupe field, and if it says yes, there will also be a field called dedupe member IDs that will list the other MMS IDs. One advantage of this path is that you don't need any specific user roles to do this. In fact, anybody on the internet can do this to view the PNX of any record on any Primo site. If you're a discovery administrator, you have another option. You can use the dedupe and Ferber test utility in the configuration and run an MMSID through to see what its matches are, or run two MMSIDs through to see if they match. I've also highlighted here the area where you can set up those rules to suppress dedupe. If you're setting them up at sort of the rule level, there's also jobs to suppress dedupe on individual records. So here's just a couple of screenshots from that dedupe and Ferber utility. You can see that it shows the key text. We'll talk about more of that later. And then on the right is the hashed key. And then at the bottom of all of that, it lists the matching MMSIDs to the record you've inputted, if there are any. So yes, dedupe does seem to be doing overlap analysis, but the dedupe process itself is a little mysterious. Does it primarily bring together things in a helpful way, or is it doing more harm than good? If there are problems, are they localized in specific keys? Should we think about turning some of these keys off, but leave others on? Could there be new keys we could add to bring things together in a new way? Before I was in this role, during our migration, an earlier version of our discovery team decided that the Ferber was causing more problems than it was solving, so they opted to turn it off. But was that the right decision? Could we maybe turn it on in a partial way, like maybe bringing together those different versions of video games into a little pile for users to look at? Would that be more helpful than having it off altogether? And then let's talk about what the deal is with this algorithm. So mark fields with specific subfields are mapped to key fields. There are different fields for serials and non-serials, though there is some overlap. The key fields are then concatenated, sometimes with some kind of additional normalization, into complete keys. Then some sort of hashing happens. I don't totally understand that, and I'm not going to talk about it today beyond this mention. The keys are also applied in priority until a match is found, so they just use the first match that they find. The documentation says that each key has a priority of high, medium, low, or more, but it doesn't list which priority goes with which key. Sometimes you can make an educated guess, but I'm not going to do that today. And then finally, deduping is not fully transitive, and it is done on the fly. So record A might match B and C, but then when you pull up record B, it might not match C at all. Again, I'm not going to go into this too much today, other than to point out that it exists. I would characterize my understanding of dedupe as partial. Some of you may very well understand this better than I do, and if so, I'm very happy to hear about it. Please get in the comments, let me know what you think. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the key fields and then the normalizations that can apply to them. In the next 3 slides, I've mapped the key fields to a field in analytics as best as I can. I'm using this titles subject area throughout because we want to catch both physical and electronic material. I don't know what digital material, if any of you have Alma D, I don't know how that shows up in analytics or how it's caught up in dedupe or Ferber at all, but let me know if you know. So you'll see for the ISBN and ISSN fields, I've given 2 options. That's because in one of the normalization processes, they're split. And in that case, the valid single normalized version makes sense. But I think normally it makes sense to pull it from the field in the bibliographic details folder. The invalid and canceled versions I haven't mapped, but they're sort of in the bib details version of the field. And I just want to highlight that the F5 key here is 245 A, B, N, and P. Because you'll see on this next slide that the F7 is also 245 A, B, N, and P. I will come back to that. You'll also see that I'm using title instead of title normalized for the brief title for serials here. Because it leaves the punctuation in, it's possible to crop to just the 245A using the colon. But because there's a bunch of other normalization that happens with the title normalized, it's going to result in fewer matches. Fewer titles are going to come together than I think we'd be expecting. Also note the F9 pagination for non-serials. That 300 field is not mapped by default, but I have mapped it to a local parameter in our environment, local param 14. So I'm going to be talking about some of those keys today. And then finally, I'm using begin publication date for F6, but it's possible that sometimes it should be publication date instead of begin publication date. And again, it's not very clear in the documentation. And here, the main entry author subfields don't quite map. I'm just rolling with it for now. But that is one thing that I would welcome suggestions for, is if there's a way to better map that author field to get those main entry fields that we want. Okay, back to F5. So the 245 A, B, N, and P, I've had a lot of back and forth with Ex Libris. If you are following along on the slides that are on the internet right now, this says the exact opposite because that is what they told me initially, and then they gave me this clarification like about a week ago. So what the F5 does that's different from the F7 is it just uses the first 20 characters and the last 10 characters of that title field and then discards the middle, but also gets rid of all of the spaces. So this is the first formula I'm going to show you today. Wherever we're using the F5 for non-serial, this is the formula that I'm using. And now let's talk about normalizations. This again, lifted straight from the documentation. The ones that we'll see are cropping the title to the first 5 words, rounding the pagination, splitting identifiers, so you only need to match one instead of all of them. I talked a little bit about that earlier. And then removing this huge list of words from the serial titles. So these are mostly in English, but there's also some German and some, I think I've seen some Spanish, and there's certainly some French in there. So this is just, they've given us the list of words that they remove. These are them. Okay, so this is the regex that I've used to remove those common words from the normalized title field where it's used throughout the keys. I will note that just using the full list of words kept hitting some sort of processing limit in analytics. So this is actually arranged in 3 different clusters of words that it's removing. And this is a good time to point out that I relied very heavily on ChatGPT to generate that last slide and also all of the other regex you're going to see in this presentation. I learned a lot from Evelyn Feldman's presentation in Analytics Afternoon last year, so I kind of understand it. And I went back to that presentation several times to try and see what I was doing. I'm generally, to be honest, pretty skeptical of LLM use, but this seems like the sort of thing that it's actually good at because I can see whether it is being successful or not and kind of read it, but it's like my reach really exceeds my grasp in terms of writing it. I also want to say it took me about an hour of back and forth with it to generate the text on the previous slide, so it does take a while. So before we even get into the full keys, here are some potential problems that I should highlight. Is it desirable or even possible to introduce some of those out-of-the-box fields as local parameters so we can target specific subfields? Is my approach to split actually what we want? And what level of normalization do we want to see? And speaking of normalization, so this is the description in the analytics documentation of the title normalized field. This all looks pretty useful. I'm assuming that it's correct, but I haven't tried to do any other normalizations except when I use that other title field, I did change it all to lowercase. Is this something else that we should be doing if we're trying to reproduce these keys accurately to see how dedupe is working? Okay, here come the actual keys. Again, if you are looking at the actual slides, some aren't correct yet, but there are many, many more. This is a 70 slide presentation, and it is not going to take, I'm not going to go all the way through it. Just going to show you some of the ones I have something to say about. And I've included both the formula and the filters I'm using to limit it to the appropriate records and only show keys that have matches resulting in dedupe, as far as I can tell. So each slide shows the key name on top and then the key description. And then the formula for the key is on the left, and the filters that I've applied are on the right, or if the key formula is super long, sometimes the filters are on the next slide. For the non-serial keys, I'm using the bibliographic level is not equal to S, and that is coming from the leader position 7. I am not a cataloger, but the cataloger I consulted said that made sense. I'm also filtering out, in most cases, that each individual component of the key is not null. And then I make sure the title is in the inventory, in the repository, that it's not suppressed from discovery, and that the number of active titles is greater than 1. And that should give me the list of all of the dedupe keys that are in play. Here we can see one of the pagination keys. And I want to mention I've also added an extra filter on the pagination one here for category of material, which is position 0 of the 007. This is filtering out materials that I think we shouldn't be using pagination to match, even if it's there for some reason. Because I skipped this part in the presentation today, but in the pagination, I'm just pulling out integers that are followed by P or PP or pages. You can see at the bottom of the formula there. In that case, I don't want to pull out the pages in the accompanying booklet to like a DVD, right? We don't want to be matching on that. So again, I'm not sure if this is how Ex Libris is doing it. They have all of this, all they said is pagination. And here is one of those split fields you can see. What I've done is no more complicated than in the non-split version. I'm just pulling the ISBN from the bib details folder instead of the normalized single ISBN from the bibliographic IDs folder. And then there are a bunch of keys that use the incorrect ISBN. I am just skipping them for now. They are all duplicated by the F3 keys. So if this is working, it works. I'm not really clear what to do about this one. Okay, and for this key, I'm just showing you the filter. I just want to point out that for fuzzy pagination, I've added that final, I'm always adding that final sort of floor cast blah, blah, blah filter. Is not equal to 0. So I have it, I've already got it in as is not null, but I'm also adding it to not equal to 0 because I feel weird about deduping things based on page numbers when they're under 10 pages. So that is what this is pulling out. If it was like 5 or 8 pages, those would both normalize to 0. Again, this is an intuition on my part, and I'm definitely open to counter ideas about whether that's a good idea or not. And finally, I just want to point out that some of the keys have square brackets around a field. That means the field is optional, so I have not added it into the filters in that case. And I think that is always the main entry or author field. And now we'll look at the serial keys. There are way fewer of them, but that common words normalization means that the formulae are often much longer. Okay, so this is the first one. It's a typo of some kind. So theoretically, C5 should be the O35, not the O01. So this is probably the same as the first non-serial key. It's pretty easy to make. It's just looking at the O35, which is mapped. But for dedupe, they also define MMSID as a key field. So I'm wondering if this is actually correct, like the description is correct instead of the label, and maybe that's at the network level. So at U of T, we're not in Collaborative Futures or CLO or any other network zone, so I don't know if MMSIDs are unique, are shared across institutions or not. Can you have the same MMSID? I'm not sure about that. Here you can see the bibliographic level in the filters. If you look at the filters, the bibliographic level is now equal to S instead of not equal to S. And also I've made the title, which is just a subfield A, but not normalized, all lowercase. That's what that blue bit is about. Okay, this is the longest formula I'm going to show today. It concatenates 5 fields together and runs the longest and most costly normalization. I will say in the UTL environment, running just this formula takes more than 20 minutes, and I've had troubles with it timing out. So if you're looking at this one, you will probably not be able to run it in the network. And I want to point out that when the key includes country of publication, as it does here, in addition to filtering out blanks, I've also filtered out the option no place unknown or undetermined.
About 2 minutes left.
Okay. Also, their description of concatenation is more complicated than what I have done here. If the subfield they're looking for is repeated, each instance of that subfield can match any other instance of the subfield. Both records don't have to have the same set of subfields. At least that is my understanding. So very quickly, let's just assume that that's all correct. What can we do with this? How do we get from the keys to a list of titles that are deduping? I think there are 2 options. You can filter on that initial report listing the keys that have more than 1 hit, or you can do a count distinct and then filter that column to there is more than 1. I think the second one's more elegant, but the first one is the one I'm going to try. And the way to do that, if you want to do it, is create a copy of the key report, save it with a new name, filter the column based on the results of the other analysis using that same key column. Then delete your number of titles as more than 1 filter, and then add in the MMS ID in any of the other columns you want. And then if you sort by the key, it'll bring all of your deduped titles together. So that's looking at a specific key, which is what I've done. Could we go the other way by inputting an MMS ID and finding out if there are any dedupe candidates? And this is my proposal. Our system crashes if I try to do it, but this is how I think it could work. Make a report with 1 column for each key, either serial or non-serial. Then use case to check if the MMS ID matches an MMS ID in one of those key reports that you've made. And if it doesn't, leave the cell blank. And then as a bonus, you could have a drill down from the key that links to a report filtered on the key that just lists all of the MMS IDs and any other information that you want. Thank you for your time. That was as fast as I could do it. Thank you. I've also got a bunch of links here. Please, this is obviously a project that is still very much in process, so I'm happy to talk about it. And
Perfect, right on time. So great enthusiasm. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got a few comments there in the chat, but no specific questions. Does anybody want to jump in with a question for Susan?
I'm just looking through the comments now. I'm not even convinced that Ex Libris devs fully understand dedupe. I have to say, I had a lot of back and forth with Ex Libris. I got some of the documentation updated. There are other things I'm going to try and get the documentation updated on. That F5 formula, it took them a long time to find in the back end. I'm going to see if they can put it in the public documentation as well. Yeah, that PNX equals true is great. Yeah. And I have not yet shared all of my files, my reports in any of the shared areas, because it's really hard to update them once they're shared, and this is still very much a work in progress. But if anybody's interested, in addition to including all of the formulae for all of the keys in the slides, I'm happy to like zip them and send them to you if you want to upload them into your environment. Just reach out. Does Susan agree with the Jamie Zawinski quote? Some people, when confronted with a problem, think, I know, I'll use regular expressions. Now they have two problems. Yes. Yes, I do. That sounds correct to me. And I see a question from Marie Song. Super interesting. Thanks for sharing, Susan. I'm curious about the potential use cases for these reports and if you've got to the point of using them yet. Thank you for asking. I have not really. The use case I'm envisioning is using them to just test how the dedupe is working more broadly than you can do in the dedupe facility. So, for example, what I might want to do is feed in all of the MMSADs for all of our, say, audio scores. Scores are another format that are vastly overmatched in dedupe, and see if there is, we know that they're overmatching, and probably if you knew more about scores than I do, you could make an intuitive guess as to which of the keys is the problem one. But now I would be able to feed in all of the scores and see which ones into reports about each key and see which one is making them dedupe, and then maybe make a decision to turn one of those keys off. Or what I think might be my like dream vision long term is one of the things you can do with Ferber is just have Ferber also run the dedupe keys. So what I think the thing that I'm imagining is turning off some keys at the dedupe level, but then turning Ferber on so that we can still see all of the records, but they show up in those little piles. So I'm certainly not at that stage yet. And the real problem is that our data is so big at U of T that I can't run I can't run the whole thing against everything all at once. It just crashes out. So figuring out how to chunk it in a way that's still going to grab the things that I needed to grab is another challenge. Do you think that Ex Libris might leverage AI to do dedupe in the future? I mean, it seems likely. Yeah, if they've got a dedupe person on that AI team, it hasn't come up in. I'm on one of their like AI focus group as sort of like a acknowledged hater. But I honestly, it does seem like the kind of thing that it would be useful for. Do you find data quality an issue with this? Yes, for sure. Are you uncovering any problem areas? Honestly, I haven't really dug into it that much. So far, my work has just been building on the keys, but I am confident that is gonna happen. And I will say a lot of our dedupe suppression so far has been a real like find a problem and then squish it out. The other thing that I'm hoping we'll be able to do now that we understand how it works a little bit more is try and figure out, like, guess things that are likely to be a problem and then sort of anticipate those problems instead of just finding them after patrons or cataloging librarians point them out to us. OCLC is leveraging AI to dedupe in WorldCat. Seems likely that Ex Libris will get there too. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Also, I don't want to manipulate, or I mean, not manipulate, monopolize the group question time. So mostly because I just want to talk about how hard it is to convince users to clear their caches.
No worries, that was great. We do have a few minutes for broad questions and answers for any of the presenters today. So anybody feel free to jump in on audio or in the chat. And we'll wrap it up by 12 with some closing remarks from Annika.
So we have Janice in the chat has given a second thumbs up for suggestions on clearing cache. Yes.
I can say what we did at U of T for that, and I say we because I'm not the one who did it. Oh, truly, Sabina, keep calm and clear your cache. What we did is our report a problem form. You select what the problem is, and if you select the error message, it has a pop-up that tells you how to clear your cache. That was implemented relatively recently. I'm excited to see in a year if that actually makes a difference or not. Yeah, I also want to recommend, I have a browser extension whose job is it just clears the cache of the page, just of the page that you're currently on, so it doesn't log you out of everything else. Just because I frequently hit that message and get mad. Yeah. Called Cookie Deleter, I think.
Nice. Anyone have any other questions for any of our presenters, or do any of the presenters have questions for each other?
What is that browser extension? So I'm on Chrome. It's called Cookie Remover, and I'm going to share it in the chat. I run into it with XWiki most commonly, so I figure there must be other OCUL people with this problem.
We might need to add that to our XWiki now. Spot docs FAQ. And Bill Denton shared one for Firefox as well. Thank you very much. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I will begin our wrap up. Let me just share my screen for a moment. Okay, hopefully you will see my slide rather than my presenter view.
Yeah, it looks good.
Thanks, Scott. So thank you again. Thank you to all of our presenters. I'm always really grateful for the experience that you will bring to these mini conferences. They're always very well supported, and it's great to see both sort of updates on previous presentations, but also new ideas coming through these mini conferences. So I love hearing about everyone's successes, your creative approaches to problem solving, and the lessons that you learn from working through different workflows and working with Alma and Primo. So Kevin showed us that we can make incremental steps towards maximizing the use of the network zone, and demonstrated how the cleanup work for this is an ongoing process. And I think it's exciting to think about how the workflow that Carleton has developed can potentially lead to sort of more shared records in the network zone without losing that local data. And we will be, as mentioned, focusing on scoping the work in the network zone over the coming year. So hopefully we'll be able to provide some more defined framework on that to answer some of those questions that arose. Thank you also to Michael for sharing his work on streamlining and automating a very manual process that we have at the moment using the API. Really great to see that happening, and looking forward to that coming out tomorrow. John's update on Brock's report a problem report really showed how we can understand the various pain points that users are experiencing when accessing resources, and how we can use that information to inform proactive communications, and also just to be responsive to the user needs. Thanks to Courtney and Melissa for walking us through how their collection maintenance team uses and cleans up the Alma claims list, and how they use that to work with the acquisitions team to ultimately make sure that items are available when they're meant to be, or at all, and to identify those persistent problems to make things more efficient. And finally, thank you, Susan, for sharing your experiment using dedupe as an overlap analysis tool. I'm sure that we can all relate to wanting to find a way of doing this, and I think it's just fascinating to see what you discovered or uncovered during that process as well. It felt like a bit of an excavation of dedupe. So thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing where that goes. So thanks everyone for attending, whether you're from an OCUL member library or our college colleagues from across Ontario. Thanks for joining us today. I hope the presentations have sparked some ideas, maybe closed some loops, opened some questions for you to ponder over the summer, and we definitely hope to have many more opportunities like this to share our experiences in the future. Again, like Nicole, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of everyone who's involved in Collaborative Futures. This initiative wouldn't happen without you all. So thank you particularly to our committees, subcommittees, and working groups. We're just popping a link to those groups in the chat now. Please have a look to see who is doing so much of this work, undertaking this on behalf of all the Omni partners. We have just gone through a changeover with our membership for our subcommittees, and I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has just finished their terms. Thank you for all the time and expertise you lent to supporting that work, and welcome to our new members. I'm looking forward to working with you all and seeing how we can move the work forward. So there's such an incredible amount of work that's undertaken by these groups on behalf of the Omni partners, as Nicole noted this morning. So thank you for that. To find out what some of this work is, the 2024-25 annual report from the Collaborative Futures Steering Committee is available on Spot Docs for those of you who work at OCUL member libraries. And that report gives an overview of the work done by these groups over the last year, but also what we're looking at for the coming year. So a couple of those things being that network zone scoping project that we talked about a bit earlier, and also how we are preparing to transition to the new Primo user interface, which will result in a new look Omni sometime after the summer 2026 dates, pending and very much reliant on the Ex Libris release dates as well. So stay tuned for more on that. For those of you who those of you who work in OCUL, you can access via the link that we've just shared in the chat there on Spot Docs. And those of you who are working outside OCUL, but you're interested in finding out more about some of our activities, please go to the OCUL website publication page. We have past annual reports there, as well as a retrospective on the last 5 years of Omni and Collaborative Futures that gives a bit of background on that. Finally, thanks to my fellow CF Comms subcommittee members, it's a small but mighty team. Thanks to Kim Ash for chairing, and our new members Scott Turner and Sylvie Nugent for their perspective and help moderating and otherwise for the sessions today. And thanks also to my colleague Katrina Forder for providing that OCUL office insight and assistance to the subcommittee as well. So please share your feedback on the mini conference. It really helps us plan future events, and of course, stay tuned for details of the recording. And please feel free to share with your colleagues. It'll be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing with everyone who registered. So there's nothing else to add to that except to say enjoy your summer. Thanks very much, everybody.